This video takes a look at how we take inventories of what we see and find in the world, from very large and ambiguous things like landscapes to very small things like curious objects we might find in a flea market. There are different kinds of inventories and different ways to account for our interactions with them. I would like to depart from the normal way of describing experiences as meanings that require more meanings and then more meanings to clarify those meanings. This method attempts to explain things by supplementing what we see as if it were a finished product, and as if it were our job to discover the backstory of that product. Rather, I would like to focus on our own encounter, the way that objects and scenes sometimes surprise us, and specifically us, not just a generic observer. This is called a criticism by the cut being the imaginary screen between the viewer and the viewed. If we think of this as being a frame, then the motive is to possess what lies beyond and within it, but the frame pushes its secrets to the back, and we are enticed into an endless project of uncovering them by removing, layer by layer, their covers. Like the boy in the painting by Borel de Cassot, I want to escape this content approach and look specifically at interactions, the way mystery works as a kind of verb, a kind of performance, where we as spectators are complicit. We enjoy seeing things disappear and reappear, and this enjoyment has its own grammar, its own rules of engagement. Unlike interpretation that begins with the frame as a trap, the grammar of engagement is more direct. It looks at the surface we imagine that separates us from the world, but imagines our connections to and past it in terms of a circuit, a round trip. We can spot situations where the world seems to invite us to make these trips, where the world seems to bring things to the table, or rather screen, that will appeal to us to make an investment, and to play with what lies on either side of the cut. In architecture, orthographic drawings use parallel construction lines to bring to the surface of the paper measurable details of a space that are equalized and transferable. Plans, elevations, and sections are like cuts into the space that subtly convert the perspective view of a single viewpoint into a touchable plane. This is not simply about how to make a technical drawing, however. The orthographic method is more about an orthopsychic relation to things that comes close to a kind of necromancy, a penetration into the imagined soul of objects and spaces. The real force of orthography is anamorphic, finding the right angle of view that achieves a balance point in the object, person, or scene that it is able to leverage with sympathetic forces. In this way, the hidden is given a voice without being exposed to the light of day. When we move away from interpreting things by adding meanings on top of meanings, as we say we are digging deeper and deeper and deeper, we move away from the idea that the history of an image, idea, or thing is its real truth, to the idea that each presence constructs an absence. Whatever is said or made relies on a reservoir of possibilities, only a few of which will be actualized in whatever is constructed. These unused signifiers don't go away, however. They are always in the mind of those who use the image, idea, or thing as a backdrop. They silently note the choices that were made, the ones that weren't, and what each choice might have meant. The unused possibilities are always there, a kind of shadow of what is said literally. When we look at the structure and role of these unused signifiers, we are taking a polythetic approach, meaning that the intentional meanings that are the aim of the literal expression, which are monothetic. These unintended ones also have a meaningfulness, but that it's polythetic, that is, multiple and undetermined. Language operates in two distinctive directions. One is horizontal or diachronic. It is the temporality of the speech or writing and reading. We don't ever know what the beginning of the sentence means until we reach the end, and we have to wait. The synchronic dimension has to do with the choices made with each selection of a word, idea, or manner of expression. Any one choice eclipses others that were not made, but these unused signifiers do not go away. They are present in a virtual sense. Just as the physical enunciation has a structure, the signifiers left behind also have a structure, but it's one made up of gaps, holes, and all the missing chances to appear in the literal expression. The technical name for this is very interesting. It's lipogram, meaning the grammar that arises out of leaving out a letter. The French writer Georges Perec wrote a famous novel that demonstrated how much a missing letter can affect what words appear literally and how they sound. Just by removing the letter E from his text, something that was not easy to do because the letter E is the most common letter both in French and English, other words had to swerve around the empty spaces and make different selections because the letter E was forbidden. Imagine how sacred space works when something like a grave is forbidden to walk on. Actually, my favorite example is the historic gate of the Technical University of Athens, closed off after the tanks crashed through it in the early morning hours of November 17, 1973. No one uses this gate or even refers to it anymore, I'm told. This architectural lipogram is a powerful but silent reminder of student and faculty resistance to the military coup. Latent signifiers are not simply symbolically absent. They can have a direct effect on the brain without our conscious awareness. In this classic psychology experiment, the complementary color green is invoked by the absence of a pink dot, where one should appear. As the blank space moves around, two things are going on. First, the phenomenon dealing with the illusion of motion where there is none, and the phenomenon of a mind's time lag. These combine to have us see a green dot moving around the circle. Make sure to stare at the cross in the center. The Thaumatrope is a simple play toy, a gadget, a trick, although with fewer moving parts than an iPhone. Yet the principle is the same. The Thaumatrope has two images, one on each side, with two holes for strings that allow the disc to be spun around so that the images merge. Thaumatropes have been found in Magdalenian caves in France. The ancient ones had only one hole, in the middle, and the hole itself was made to play a role in the combination of the two images into one. The Thaumatrope combines two images, but it doesn't merge them. It preserves the idea of the gap dynamically, and it engages the viewer at a neurological level, unconsciously, to be aware of the bird in cage as independent but combined. The merger is not just an overlap or confusion, because the images are correlated. The bird is out of its cage in the first version, and the spinning puts it back in the cage, but now it has incorporated the dynamic idea of spinning. In Alfred Hitchcock's mysterious film Vertigo, the binary becomes the actress who plays the wife who is to be murdered. The actress is to attract the close attention of a detective who follows her because he thinks she is drawn to commit suicide on account of her fascination with a dead ancestor who is betrayed by her husband. In fact, the real wife is actually being betrayed by her husband, but the detective is feminized in this gimmick, turned into a witness whose testimony will clear the murderous husband. But of course the detective has actually been blind. We have a lot of binaries and a lot of idempotency going on, lots of birds and lots of cages being spun so quickly that we cannot escape the trap of the gimmick. I propose that we use the idea of the Thaumatrope to explain the otherwise complicated exchanges between the dead ancestor Carlotta the two versions of the wife Madeline, and the two versions of the actress, including the fatal one, once the detective has discovered her walking in the street after his nervous breakdown. Another kind of thaumatrope was used by Edgar Allan Poe in his famous short story, The Purloined Letter. The text is divided into two parts, hinged at the point where the detective Dupin is handed a reward check for finding the letter hidden from the Queen. On one side of the text, there are phrases that are answered on the other side. The most literal ones have been discovered by Richard Copley, a Poe scholar teaching at Penn State. Perhaps there are others, but the idea is that the end of the story answers to the beginning in a cumulative way, as if to say the thaumatrope begins to spin slowly and then quickly, adding more images as it goes. The space indicated by the omega corresponds to the spin of the thaumatrope. It is the axis, or the string, that spins the token and transfers the latent image to the reader. The telling feature of this structure is that the hiding place of the letter was a card rack, which is a phonetic palindrome. That is, the same pronounced forward or backward, a kind of spin in miniature. In a final example, we move the thaumatrope idea to something more resembling a stage performance, where the viewer steps out of some ongoing activity to pause in fascination before images that present a story outside of ordinary reality. This illustration shows the hero Aeneas on his way from Troy to found the new city-state of Rome. On the way, he decides to consult his dead father Anchises. He must descend into Hades to speak with his father and return alive, something that only heroes were allowed to do. He arrives at the gates of hell and is sidetracked by the magnificent cast bronze doors, left in tribute by a past visitor, the famous Daedalus, reputed to be the first architect. The images on the doors tell a story. In a way, the two doors are like the two sides of the thaumatrope. Aeneas must combine the images into a story, and there are several possible different combinations. Before he can figure out the puzzle, however, he is summoned by his guide to the underworld. We could say that the puzzle is cut in half. This interruption has a spooky connection to the interruption he's making to his main journey. The visit to Hades, the classical theme of the descent, or katabasis, is outside the time and logic of the main story. And, again inside this side trip, there is another descent into the show left behind by Daedalus. Criticism done by the cut, rather than piling definitions on top of definitions, focuses on the way the distinction can be present at all scales and in all locations. Just as the ekphrasis of Daedalus's portals cut into Aeneas's visit to Hades, the journey to Hades cut into his journey from Troy to Rome. And of course the cuts inside the Daedalian Gate images were what created a puzzle that Aeneas only half solved. Is Hades a full 360-degree reality that stands as a virtual shadow to the 360-degree panorama of the living? Or is the divide between life and death a cut across a circle, making two 180-degree halves? If life and death are each circles, then we have to imagine that the human subject, being both about life and death, is really 720 degrees. And this would have to be the circuit, the dynamic motion between the two states. Geometrically, we can see that this is going to get complicated. The geometry of Euclid works fine for the living, but it clearly is out of its depth in Hades, and for latent signifiers in general. We have to call on a geometry that is logically prior to Euclid, and which is historically prior to the pictorial world in the forms of the uncanny of the mythic mind. Both the geometry and mythic thought employ two principal ideas, that of self-intersection, that is the theme of doubles, as in the belief that the living body is shadowed by an immortal soul, and the idea of non-orientation, which is that while the Euclidean world can be ordered geographically, spatially, and temporally, the world of Hades is defined topographically by its twists, turns, and folds. I was able to touch on only about half of the themes brought up in the paper that is posted on the web to supplement this video. And there are about twice this number that should be included in a full discussion of this idea of criticism by the cut, polythetic sets, and thaumatropes. Just as the idea of Ersatz conjecture involves making up techniques and bringing in ideas as you go along, this kind of analysis doesn't have any set number of ideas. Each project expands to fill the experience. But like projective geometry's surfaces of self-intersection and non-orientation, projects tend to turn back to their origins and perform their own self-intersection by creating a circuit rather than a circle.